We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Chesam at Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 58a. This is the sixth parak of Meseches Zevachim. The Mishnah says, Kodshei Kodshim sheshechotan barosh hamizbeach. Kodshei Kodshim, those are the holier of the karbonos. If those are slaughtered on the top of the mizbeach, again in general, karbonos that are Kodshei Kodshim, let's say a karbonola for example, a carbon that's Kodshei Kodshim, that has to be slaughtered in the north of the Azara. And so now the Mishnah is talking about, let's say it's slaughtered on the top of the mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi says, Ki'ilu nishchetu b'tzafon, that's the same as if it was slaughtered in the north. That is a kosher area to slaughter kodshei kodshim. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. Mechatzi hamizbeach uladarim. If you're at the midpoint of the mizbeach to the south, essentially the southern half, that's kedarim. That's considered like the south, and therefore it would not be good for slaughtering kodshei kodshim. Mechatzi hamizbeach ulatzafon, from the midpoint of the mizbeach to the north half of the mizbeach ketzafon, that's considered like the north of the Azara, and so therefore in that area one would be able to slaughter the kodshei kodshim. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Omer Haya Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi would say, and that's the Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah. We'll see Rashi in a moment in terms of how Rabbi Yochanan knows this. But Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yossi would say, Kulei Mizbeach B'tzafon Koi, that the entire Mizbeach actually was in the north. In other words, according to what the Gemara is saying right now, when Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah says that if you slaughter kodshei kodshim on the top of the Mizbeach, it's as if it was slaughtered in the north. The whole Mizbeach actually was in the north of the Azara, and so therefore that's why it would be no problem if it's slaughtered, if the kodshei kodshim are slaughtered on the Mizbeach, according to Rabbi Yossi. Rashi explains, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Omer Haya, Gemara Gomer La Rabbi Yochanan. We'll see more of this as the Gemara continues, but this is a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan had. In other words, it's not that Rabbi Yochanan is deriving this from Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. It's a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan had, that, again, according to Rabbi Yossi, the Mizbeach was in the north, and so therefore, again, that's why it's slaughtered on the top of the Mizbeach. It's going to be kosher. Kula Mizbeach b'tzafon kai. And so the Gemara says, Umay ki'ilu, but if that's true, so why does it say in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yossi says it's ki'ilu nishchetu b'tzafon? If it's slaughtered on the top of the Mizbeach, it's as if it was slaughtered in the north of the Azara. It is being slaughtered in the north of the Azara. And the Gemara says to that, Ma'u detema, what might you have said, Bo'inan al yerech, that it has to be al yerech. It means to say it has to be al yerech ha-mizbeach, along the side of the Mizbeach. V'lekan, you don't have that if it's being slaughtered on the top of the Mizbeach. And so Kamash Mulan, that's all Rabbi Yossi is teaching. But again, according to Rabbi Yossi, the Mizbeach was in the north. It really is the north of the Azara. It's just one might not have understood that you can slaughter the carbon, you can slaughter the animal on the top of the Mizbeach. That's the chiddush of Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Zeira Ravasi. Rabbi Zeira said to Ravasi, again, the statement of Rabbi Yochanan was from Ravasi. So Rabbi Zeira says to Ravasi, Elameat, according to that. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, so then the logic should follow that according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, who says only in the north half of the Mizbeach you can slaughter kodshei kodshim. So Hachanami, Dechetziu B'tzafon, V'chetziu B'darma, are we going to say that according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, the position of the Mizbeach was different? Half of it was in the north and half of it was in the south. And if you're going to say indeed that is true, that the position of the Mizbeach was different according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, but you said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Modi Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would admit Shim Shachtan Kenegdon Bekarka, let's say you slaughtered the animal in the same place, but not on top of the Mizbeach, but rather on the ground, somehow underneath, so to speak, the Mizbeach, on that ground area, so Psula would actually be disqualified. So it sounds like that is not the case. It does not sound like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Mizbeach was half in the north and half in the south, because then Bekarka in the same area, in the north of the Azara, it should have been good. And so the Gemara continues and says, Amar Lei said back to him, Hachi Kamar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here, because again, what's going on over here in the Gemara is the question is whether we're deriving all of this from the Mishnah in terms of the position of the Mizbeach, or was this a tradition, as Rashi just mentioned earlier. And Rashi explains first, Mai Ka'ilu, again, according to, if Rabbi Yossi holds that the entire Mizbeach was in the north, what does it mean? It's as if it was slaughtered in the north. Havadai B'tzafon Nishchat, it certainly was slaughtered in the north. And then the question of Rabbi Zeira to Ravasi, Ela Me'ata, Kasalka daitach to Rabbi Zera, the mimas nisin gomer Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Zera understood that Rabbi Yochanan learned this from the Mishnah. Lahada Omer Haya Rabbi Yossi. In other words, when Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yossi holds the Mizbech in the north, that was being derived from the Mishnah, and that's why he understood that in terms of the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, so it must be 50-50. It must be that half of the Mizbech was in the north and half was in the south. That was the basis of the question that Rabbi Zera asked Rav Asi. Mod Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, yet we know that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would admit, even though Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that the midpoint to the north, that north part of the Mizbeach, it's kosher to slaughter the Kodshei Kodshim. Modahu Shem Shachtu Keneged Oso Makam, he admits that if it was slaughtered in the same location, but mitachteim, but underneath, not on top of the Mizbeach, but underneath, bekarka, on the ground, psulos, would be disqualified. And Rashi notes, the Gemara later will explain, how is it even possible to slaughter underneath the Mizbeach? And Rashi continues, Amar Lei said to him, Ravasi Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi said back, this is actually what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. Kilomar, what the Gemara now means to say is as follows. Omer Haya Rabbi Yossi to come Rabbi Yochanan Le'el. When Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yossi would say that the Mizbech was in the north, Lav mi masnis and Gomer, that was not being derived from the Mishnah. Elohachi Gomer Lome Rabosov, that was just a tradition that he had from his Rabbeim. Umasnis and Lav b'mokom Mizbeach pligi, and the Mishnah, it's not a machlokas where the Mizbech was. The name of Rabbi Yossi Kula B'tzafon that will say that Rabbi Yossi holds it's all in the north. For Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda name a Chetziot Tzafon, and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says half of it was in the north. That's actually not what's going on. Elam midrasha dekra, rather the machlokas over here is just in terms of how to darshan the psukim. Again, back in the Gemara says Amar Lei, he said back to him, again Ravasi said back to Rabbi Zera, Hachi Kamar Rabbi Yochanan, this is actually what Rabbi Yochanan was saying, Shnehem mikra echad darshu, both of them, meaning Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, they're darshaning the same pasuk in different ways. The pasuk says, V'zavachta olav esolosecha v'yashlamech, it says you're going to slaughter on it, talking about on the Mizbeach, your olos and your shlamim. Olos are kodshei kodshim, shlamim are kodshim kalim. Shlamim are able to be slaughtered anywhere in the Azara. And so the question is, how do we interpret this pasuk that on the Mizbeach one can slaughter the ola and the shlamim? Rabbi Yossi holds kulo liola, v'kulo l'shlamim. The entire top of the Mizbeach can be used to slaughter a carbon ola, and the entire top of the Mizbeach can be used to slaughter a carbon shlamim. That's why Rabbi Yossi says the ola can be slaughtered on the top of the Mizbeach, the whole Mizbeach. For Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda savar, but Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda holds the way to interpret the pasuk is chetzio la'ola v'chetzio l'shlamim. It actually must be 50-50. You're going to slaughter there your olos and your shlamim. Half of it is for the ola, so that would be the north half is for the ola, and then the southern half of the Mizbeach will be for the shlamim. And why does Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda understand the pasuk in that fashion? Because if it should enter your mind that the entire Mizbeach can be used for carbon ola, kulo liola kosher, that the entire Mizbeach for an ola is kosher, so hashta kulo liola kosher, if that's true by an ola, the entire Mizbeach is kosher for an ola, where it's more restricted where you can slaughter an ola, it has to be in the north of the Azara. So kulo l'shlamim miboy, would the pasuk even need to say that the entire top of the Mizbeach is good for a shlamim? It wouldn't even be necessary to say. The very fact that it's being said seems to imply that we divide the Mizbeach 50-50. 50% of the Mizbeach for Ola, 50% for Shlamim. V'idach, now the other one will respond, meaning Rabbi Yossi will respond to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, no, Itzrich, it is necessary. Even if there was the entire Mizbeach for an Ola, it still should write Shlamim as well. Because one might have thought, Ola hu dedachik le'makom, that an Ola where you don't have so much area in the Azar, you only have the north of the Azar to slaughter, there's not that much area, so we expand the area a little to the top of the Mizbeach. Aval Shlamim, but maybe one might think that a Shlamim de lo dachik le'makom, where it's not pressed in terms of space, there's plenty of space to slaughter a Shlamim. So Eimala, one might say no, it shouldn't be done on the top of the Mizbeach, and so Kamash Malon, that's why the pasuk is saying that again, both Ola and Shlamim can be slaughtered on the top of the Mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan, this is the proper text, Kulo liola v'kulo l'shlamim, it's all good for Ola, all good for Shlamim, Kulo roy l'shchitas Ola, it's all good to slaughter an Ola, to Ktushas Safon Olav, because it's considered Safon, it's considered north, Migzeres HaKosav, that comes from the Gzeres HaKosav, V'kulo roy l'shlamim, it's all fit for Shlamim, Shashlamim ksheir and afit Safon, because Shlamim also can be slaughtered in the north, it's okay to slaughter a Shlamim anywhere in the Azara, Mikal v'chomer b'pirkin d'leil, this was a Kal v'chomer in our parak earlier, the Doch hachik lamakum, and then the Gemara said that there's not a lot of space to slaughter an ola. Shemakoman katan v'dachuk. There's a smaller amount of space. Shein kosher la elatzafon. Only the north is kosher to slaughter an ola. Upamim shaolos marubo. Sometimes there's a lot of olos. V'tzar lahem amakum. There's not enough space. Ve'echsher lanakasav rosh hamizbeach. So the pasuk says that the top of the mizbeach is kosher. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we just said above. Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Modi Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would admit, Shem Shechaton Kenegdon Bekarka Psulos, that if he slaughtered them, he slaughtered the Kachei Kachim in the same spot, opposite the Mizbeach, but on the Karka, on the ground, then it would be disqualified again. We learn from that statement that according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, the entire Mizbeach is actually in the Dorum, it's actually in the south. It's not 50% in the north and 50% in the south, and it's just a Gezeras HaKasav that in the northern half of the Mizbeach, one is allowed to slaughter Kachei Kachim. That's the explanation of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, and the idea is therefore that if in the same area of the Mizbeach, meaning the northern half of the Mizbeach, if instead you slaughtered it on the ground in that area, then that would not be good. The reason that would not be good, again, is because the entire Mizbeach actually is in the south. It's only on the top of the Mizbeach that it has a status as if it's considered to be the north of the Azara. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Ravacha mi Difti le Ravina. Ravacha from Difti said to Ravina, but what exactly does this statement even mean? My kenegdon bakarka. What does it mean that a person would slaughter the Kachei Kachim in the same spot, but not on the Mizbeach, meaning the northern half of the Mizbeach, but not on the Mizbeach itself, but bakarka on the ground? What exactly does that mean? Ilema ama yisod ama sovev. If you're going to say what it means is there was the ama of the base of the Mizbeach, or the ama of the sovev, which was the ledge of the Mizbeach, maybe that's where the slaughtering took place, but that wouldn't make any sense. Hai gufe mizbeachu. First of all, that itself should be considered the mizbeach. Viod my kenegdan bekarkan. Further on the ground, that's not the ground, so that cannot be what that statement means. V'chiteiman, if you're going to say David mechilos bekarka v'shachit behu, maybe he made some tunnels in the earth, tunnels in the ground, and slaughtered over there. So we're talking about underneath the north half of the mizbeach. There were some tunnels, and in that area would be no good because the mizbeach itself was in the south. It's only on the top of the mizbeach, the north half, that it's good according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. But if you say that, but in such a situation, would it even be a kosher mizbeach? But we learned in a brisa, mizbach adama tasali, you have to make a mizbeach of adama, of earth. It means sheyeh mechuber me adama. It means that it has to be attached from the earth. Shelo yivnenu lo al gabi mechilos, that it should not be built on top of tunnels, velo al gabi kipin, and not on top of arches. And so that cannot be the case as well. And so the Gemara says, lo no tzrich, it's necessary, the botzrei bitsuri. What happened was, he made the mizbeach, let's say they made the mizbeach a little smaller, so the mizbeach was a little bit larger, now they made it a little bit smaller, so the same area where the mizbeach used to be, and if you would have slaughtered on top of the mizbeach over there, that northern half of the mizbeach, it would have been good, but now there's no mizbeach there anymore. They made the mizbeach a little smaller, and you slaughtered in that area on the ground, so that would be problematic, and again, that shows that the mizbeach was entirely in the south, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. And Rashi explains, my kenegdon bekarka. Again, what does it mean that corresponding to that area of the mizbeach on the ground? Rashi says, haleko lefrushe. Now, one cannot explain kenegdon beritzbo lemizrach hamizbeach. Maybe what you'll say is, what it means is we're talking about on the floor, but to the east of the mizbeach. Meaning to say, let's say you have the northern half of the mizbeach, you're on that northern half of the mizbeach, and just go right next to the mizbeach, that half, to the east. Maybe that's what it means. That also should be able to prove, if that area is not good for slaughtering, wouldn't that also be able to prove that the mizbeach actually is entirely in the south, even the northern half is in the south? Or uva ma'arava, or you could say maybe not the east of the mizbeach, maybe the west of the mizbeach. That actually, says Rashi, you cannot say within Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because if so, if that's what it meant, lo have a kasha milsel Ravasi leil, it actually would not have been a good question against Ravasi earlier. Because that would not have proven, you could not have derived that Rabbi Yossi does not hold that half of the mizbeach was in the north. Even if the entire mizbeach was in the north, but to the east and west of the mizbeach it happens to be, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds you're not allowed to slaughter. That's just Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda's individual opinion. He says that when it says that you have to slaughter Kachei Kachim in the north of the Azara, it just means directly north of the mizbeach. It cannot be northeast of the mizbeach. It cannot be northwest of the mizbeach. Even if it's near the wall of the Azara, that northern wall of the Azara, Posel im Moshach mikeneged zavis hamizbeach tzafona lemizrach or lemayrav. He would say it's disqualified if it was a little to the east or a little to the west and it wasn't directly north of the mizbeach. The daikinon al yerech, because according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, it has to be literally al yerech, right to the side of the mizbeach on the north. Kido amar beperak beis, like we say in the second parak, eza utzafon mikir mizbeach tzafoni ad kosel azor tzafonis keneged hamizbeach kula. What's considered north? It's from the northern wall of the mizbeach until the azara, that direct area right over there. Avol moshach mikeneged hamizbeach, but if it's drawn a little bit away from right opposite the mizbeach, lo, then it wouldn't be good. Hilkach, therefore, al karchach hai kenegdo di alfinan mina de makam hamizbeach lav tzafonu tachtav kamer. You have to say that when we say that if it was slaughtered again on top of the mizbeach, the northern half, it's okay, but kenegdo bekarka is not okay, we must mean right underneath that area of the mizbeach would not be okay. That's why we're trying to show that the mizbeach is not in the north, it's entirely in the south. Umayi, so if that's the case, what exactly is the situation? How are you able to slaughter the animal underneath the mizbeach? If you're going to say that you slaughter the animal by the ledge or the base, first of all, that's not kenegdan, that's not directly opposite the top of the mizbeach. Ela mizbeach mamish, that is the actual mizbeach. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would say that's fine. Again, from the northern half of the mizbeach is fine. And so then the Gemara said maybe it's underneath tunnels, maybe it's underneath arches, and finally the Gemara said the answer is the botzrei b'tzurei. Im nimlach lekatzer as mizbeach, if he decided to make the mizbeach a little smaller, v'nishar mechza shel tzafon panei, and now that northern half of the mizbeach is no longer mizbeach over there, v'shachat sham, and he slaughtered over there, psulos, it's going to be disqualified. V'afagav the yerechu, even though it is yerech, even though it's right there at the side of the mizbeach, pasal it is pasal, almos svira lei bedorum azarahu. So you see that he holds, again, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds that really the mizbeach was entirely in the south, and that's the whole idea, that only on top of the mizbeach it's okay, but the same location not on top of the mizbeach is not. The lo amai pasale, because if not, why would it be disqualified? It must be, again, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, the entire mizbeach is in the south, and the northern half of the mizbeach from Gezeres HaKosav, we learn that that's kosher to slaughter, kodshei kodshim. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Zera says, Efshar iso lahad Rabbi Yochanan, is it possible that what Rabbi Yochanan says is correct, meaning Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yossi holds the Mizbeach is in the north? Is it possible that that's true, velo tanina lo b'masnisan, and we wouldn't learn that in some Mishnah? There must be some Mishnah which makes reference to that idea. So Nafak Dok V'Yeshkach, he went out and he found the following Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Meseches Talmud, Ditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Talmud, Beiru Misham Atzei Ta'ena Yafim, they took from there, this was from the chamber of the wood, they took wood from a fig tree, good wood, good quality wood, l'sader ma'arocha shniya shel ketoras, in order to arrange the second ma'arocha for the ketoras. This is talking about the firewood that was arranged on the outer mizbech. We'll see Rashi in a moment. And they put this wood, keneged keren ma'aravis dromis, they put it in the southwestern corner of the outer mizbeach, moshech min hakeren klapet safon arba amos, it was 4 amos away from the corner, 4 amos northward away from the corner, again, of this southwestern corner of the Mizbeach. Biomed chamish son gechalim, and they would put the amount of wood that would be estimated to be about 5 saw of coals. Uveshabbos beomed shmona son gechalim, and on Shabbos it would be an estimate of 8 saw of coals. Shesham hayu nosnin shnei bazichei levona shalechem haponim, because there they would put the 2 bazichei levona, which is the frankincense of the lechem haponim. They would put it over there, so they needed more for Shabbos. Simona, and what was the siman? Rabbi Yossi, it's Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa. And Rashi explains, Efshar Isa Lahad Rabbi Yochanan, is it possible that what Rabbi Yochanan said is correct? Diamar Omer Hoyer Rabbi Yossi Kulim Mizbech B'tzafon Kaya. Again, Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi Yossi holds the whole Mizbech is in the north. V'lo Taninan Lo Shem Remez B'Mishnah B'Shisha Starim, and we don't find a hint to it anywhere in Mishnayos. Is that possible? So Dok Ve'eshkach, he searched and he found B'Mishnas Tam, and he found in Meseches Tamid, it says in the Mishnah, Beiru Misham Midir Ha'etzim, they would select from the chamber of wood, Atzei Ta'ena Yafin, they would select good quality fig wood, B'shal Ta'ena Ha'yuragilim, they used to use fig wood specifically, V'tama Godu Shabois, a Takana L'Adam Harishon, V'yasu Lem Chaguros, there's an Agadaic reason for that it was a Takana for Adam Harishon, specifically to be from a fig tree, Ma'arocha Shniya Shal Ketores, and then they would set up the second pile of firewood of the Ketores, Eitzal Ma'arocha Gedola, this was by the large pile of wood that was used in general general for burning on the Mizbeach. Hayu Mesadrin Ma'aracha Katana, they would set up a smaller pile of firewood, and they did that Litol Mimena Gecholim. It was in order to take from that pile, they would take coals, Lahachnes al Mizbeach Hapnimi, and they would put those on the inner Mizbeach, Shlosha Kavin L'chol Boker. They would take 3 kav L'chol Boker for Erev, 3 kav for the morning and evening, and they did that Lahaktir Aleim Ketoris. That was in order to burn the incense. So they took the coals from the outer Mizbeach to the inner Mizbeach and burned the Ketoris on the inner Mizbeach. Of Meseches Yuma Beperak Tarif Bekalfi Besofi Alfina Mikra the Al Mizbeach Achitzon Sarach Lios Marach Lekach. It's learned in Meseches Yuma. They learned from Sukkim that on the outer Mizbeach they had to make this Maracha for this purpose. Keneged Marav Istromis, again, they would put this Maracha in the southwestern corner of the outer Mizbeach, Shel Mizbeach of the Mizbeach. Umashach Letzad Safan Larchikum Menaker and Dalet Amos, but it was 4 amos north of the actual corner, of the actual southwest corner of the Mizbeach. V'tam Meforish L'kamei Ma'ishna HaKeren Zeh, it's going to be explained later why specifically this corner. Umay Time Moshcha Heimenu Letzafan Dalet Amos, why was it northward by Dalet Amos, by 4 amos? Moshach men akeren klap itzaf on arba maskaras. That's the text. V'chein matzino b'seder haMishnah b'Mishnas Talmud. That's what we find in the Mishnah and Talmud also. B'yomer chamesh soin gecholim, and the amount of wood would be that it would be able to produce an estimate of 5 saw of coals. L'fiyomer hey soin gecholim hayunosin sham eitzim. That's how much wood they would put there to get 5 saw of coals. Kach shiuro lachtos besochu barosh hamizbeach shucholak machtos shel saw. They would use the shovel they would use was for about a saw. L'Rabbi Yossi damer b'seder yuma v'chol yom chosa v'shel saw u'ma'ara b'soch gimel kavin. That's according to Rabbi Yossi, who says again that they would shovel it up with a saw and then they would pour it into gimel kavin, into one that contained 3 kav. U'v'shabbos hayu mesadrin sham l'fi yomer chesoin, and on Shabbos they would have an estimate of 8 saw. L'fi shetzarach lahakter habozichin al mizbeach hachitzon, because there they had to do something additional. They had to burn the bazichin, the frankincense, on the outer mizbeach. Rashi notes shal mizbeach hapnimi ein hektar ela shel ketoras shachars v'yarvis. On the inner mizbeach, the only thing that they would burn is the ketoras, the incense, morning and evening. So the bazichin was burned specifically on the outer mizbeach. Kedechsiv lo salu olav ketoras zora. And then the Gemara said, "Umay simona." What is that question? Ma'u hasimin shehukva lahem lema'arocha shniu la'aktoras bazichin karen ma'aravis dromis. The Gemara is asking, how do we know specifically the southwest corner? What is the siman for that? Umashach arba amos min hakeren u'letzafon, and that it has to be specifically 4 amos north from the corner. And the Gemara said it follows Rabbi Yossi the Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis.